So my first poem started rather ungracefully, rather reactively. I could feel the intensity of pain, anger, rage, uh, you know, and I looked around my room and I felt like smashing everything. I was probably 14, and and what struck me what struck me at the time was that I could destroy everything in my room and it would not satisfy this rage. In other words, all I would have at the other side of smashing everything in my room was a smashed up room. I would still be enraged and I'd still be in pain. And so it seemed like a waste of a room. And so I didn't smash up the room. Instead, what I did was, holding my pen, I focused all of the energy and all of the intensity into every single movement. And I let my hand with the pen kind of focus on that. And there was a lot of fuck, 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 those fucking bad. But the real focus was to be totally present to the intensity of the feeling and to the word, and to not move my pen until it captured it. And in doing this, the words moved into an almost sigil-like dimension, meaning when capturing that intensity, it wasn't really about the word anymore. It was about complete and utter concentration. Fuck. Have I got it? It did that. See, if I did my job impeccably, the energy was discharged at the end of the word. If I wasn't paying attention, if I just moved my hand from a mental point of view, if I got too far ahead of myself, if I dissociated from my body, there was no release. But if I put that energy into my hand, there was an integrity. My hand could be a conduit. And then what I saw on the page was also, there was not a focus on lines on the page or anything. The focus in intensity, in pressure on the pen, in lines was again expressive. And so I started to understand the nexus between sensation, between sound, between spittle, between gesture, between shape. That there's a nexus where all of these different energies come together. And they're all part of the thing. It's not a type, a printed document that is printed absolutely generically. You see, with an old typewriter, when you were furious and tapping on the typewriter, you'd feel the intensity of the keys. And then when you were more light and, didn't feel so strongly, the ink would be lighter because you were physically and mechanically moving keys. And the reader of that document could imagine, the intensity. What was that feeling that drove this word to be so pounded out? And there's a way that pressure in the density of ink was part of the dynamic. And I understood that. I understood that a word was not just a word. It was the way it was written. It was the intensity of the ink. And I understood that the focus was in transmuting and releasing energy and in a way that, in this case, could save a room. My room never got vandalized because I formed a mechanism of relating to that energy with sound, with gesture, with words. Now, the first, quote, poem was simply that. A lot of curse, fuck, shit, bastard. that was pretty much the first 2 pages of poetry that I ever wrote. And I say poetry because its purpose was to convey emotional charge, not to make sense, not to follow the rules, not to be pleasant, not to be antagonistic. There was no agenda other than capturing energy in symbol and language on the page. Now this is incredibly different, because when I write a short story, etc., punctuation is important. And that's another thing. Punctuation became fluid in what I'm calling poetry, an artistic expression rather than a lineal, courteous, verbal, syntax composed composition. An artistic expression, an artistic rendition. And so as I began to work with poetry, the focus was what wants to be said here. Now, this leads out of normal language in some cases. For example, I might invent a word. And if that word captured the energy that I was conveying more effectively than any other word, meaning if I felt the energy moving through my body, moving through my hand into that word, then that was an impeccable word. Because the word was a conduit, a mechanism of transforming unconscious energy into conscious energy, of releasing physical energy into consciousness energy in a lighter form, where there would literally be a discharge in my body. And if a word like slitherback, you see, just in saying that word, there is a shift in energy. There is an impact in consciousness. Now, it has no agenda. It has no reference. There's no lineal connection that I can make between the word slitherback and what's going on inside. So what we see here is a complex relationship with self, because while I have no conscious awareness of a lineal or logical connection between that word and the energy that I'm moving, I am now I'm now as an artist and a synesthete. So synesthesia is the blending of the senses. And that is escalating. We have a cresting wave of synesthesia here, where the sound, the movement of the face, the gestures of the arm, the intensity of the moment, and an awareness of energy movement is peaking, is increasing, while simultaneously the focus on normal, rigid, what is a normal video? What is a normal way to talk? What is a normal subject? What is even a normal way of looking at poetry? All of that is out the window. All of that is out the window as we're looking at this terrain of synesthesia, of kinetic engagement, of energy, of feeling, of thought, of language, of gesture, of pressure. And this is the domain of poetry, the domain of the poet. To let this flow. Now, the education of the conscious mind, for me, came in the fact that as I was doing all of this stuff, emoting, feeling, gesturing, sounding, sometimes a word might become a glyph, a hieroglyph. A word might become a hieroglyph where the shape of a letter might start becoming the shape of an object, of a piece of art. And so the lines on the page, if there were lines in the book in which I was writing to, ceased to bind the flow of expression. I might go up and down with the line. I might take a letter to be the size of a page, writing, and then S, and then watch the energy go down the S, down the spiral, and see, where did it want to go? Did it want to go back up? Did it want to loop back? Did it move on to another page? So we're now releasing bounding concepts, dogmas, and ideas. The dogma that things always flow from left to right, the dogma that things always flow down, the dogma that says that one letter is the same as the other letters in the word, and the dogma that it's either a letter or a drawing. What if half of the word is letters and half of the word is a drawing? What if you and draw a house? And where does one go in the house? Where does the house take us? As the dark room in the house. What is the feeling of the dark room? What is the feeling of the dark room in the house? What is the origin of the dread of the dark room of the house? What is the sound? What is the sound? And what is the imaginative landscape? One can think of Slytherin and the landscape of Voldemort. Meaning, as I try and capture synonyms not of words, but of energies, synonyms of energy. So there's an energy in the dark room in the house. And what are the synonyms of that energy? Where have I seen that energy before, inside and out, in my family, in the world? Where does that energy connect as a vibration, as a feeling tone? And what do the colors look like in that tone? And what types of events created that constellation of energy? Now, as I'm exploring and flowing and opening, there are pivot points to go left or right, and the question is, where do I go? And the question is, why? Why do I go there? Why do I take the left turn rather than the right turn in the landscape of beauty, in the landscape of gibberish? Gibberish. Why go left and not right? Why? What's going on? What's going on? And they're the witness. The witness to notice intuitive connections between this point and this point that the cult around us does not normally connect. And so the witness of the poetry unfolding, gets to connect things that the cult out there views as separate, views as isolated and non-integrated structures. But the poet sees that there's a slide between this part of this idea and this part of this memory. There's a slide. that if one gets on that slide, one's 2 seconds away from being swept from this location in the psyche into this location of the psyche. And the question is why? What are the connections? What are all the geometric patterns within the psyche between the dark and the light? And one of the things that I would do is follow, empty, open, into a terrain of the psyche, into the terrain, a terrain in my psyche, and then watch where it flowed. Watch that river of energy and consciousness flow around a corner, and be surprised and delighted, the anticipation building. This energy is going somewhere. Where will it lead me? Building, 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 and then round the bend as a vista, an unexpected vista, or sometimes like a gleam in a tunnel. Sometimes like a gleam in a tunnel as one sees the light but does not see the shapes within the dawn. They're too far, but I can feel the resonance. We're coming to the waterfall. We're listening to the rumble of a sound that when we go over, there's a transformation. The shape that one occupies to go over a waterfall cannot necessarily sustain the consciousness, the energy, as it lands at the base of the waterfall. So how does the structure transform? No energy is created or destroyed. It takes one form, then another form, then another form, then another form, moving towards grace, moving towards beauty, moving towards light, moving towards grace, beauty, moving towards goodness, Platonic values, moving from one shape to another. And how does it occur? What is the pathway in words and shapes and images and color? What is the synesthetic pathway that an energy dances from one shape into another? That is the question in a poem. And so, having discovered the power, the majesty, the incredible possibility, the transcendent doorway that is a poem, that is a nexus of shape, sound, energy, intensity, movement, repetition, gaps and sounds, rhythms, and probability fields. Because some sentences in a poem, were beautiful not because of the sentence, but because of the probability field that surrounded the sentence. Some sentences had a range and breadth where they could mean this and they could mean this, and they could have rhymed in this way, but they rhymed in this way, and both would have been true. The most satisfying witness and creativity of all was standing at the crossroad of language, shape, color, light, and image, the crossroad of emotion, the nexus of the now, standing at the crossroad and seeing the poem ripple out in all directions validly, and noticing the beauty, noticing the joy, noticing the flow. Where does it want to go? Where does it want to go? Where does the energy trapped in the rhythm of my creation find the most luminous light? And the greatest power, the greatest artistry in work, the greatest dignity and satisfaction is taking energy, taking God eyes, particles of awareness trapped in a dark form, and capturing, holding, honoring the dark form of those God-like particles, those goddess tears in a sultan's brew, the goddess tears in a Satan's hue, those, as we move into play, the goddess and watching the energy that entered such a rugged shape, such a mountainscape, such cross-haired right-angle lines, such sharp and dense shapes, watching it mitigate, watching it stir, watching it open out of that shape into something beautiful, into something happy to be itself, released from the prison of the curse of my consciousness, of the curse of my cult, into simmering, shimmering butterflies that move out into something beyond words, that I see at the edge of consciousness, at the edge of the horizon of language, at the edge of the horizon of the image. Sometimes a resonance crescendos and goes out of view, meaning I know where it's going, but it's going past language. I know where it's going, but the light that is shimmering is beyond the vibration measure point of a human eye, that the human measure point has a range where stuff in this range can be measured, and then as it moves just out of sound, just out of sight, just around the bend of consciousness, and yet vectoring, directing, moving with a momentum that's taking my consciousness to the edge of imagination. This is the satisfaction of an artist. This is the satisfaction of a poet. To take an idea outside of the clothes of the language that housed it for a while and deliver it back to her. Deliver it back to her in that landscape beyond the ego, the telescopic lens of a cult that reduces everything down into language, and not just language, but the language of a particular cult viewed through lenses that make some things expand and other things get smaller, and in doing so distort the symmetry, the grace of all that is into some imbalanced shape that puzzles us by its incompleteness, that frustrates us with its lack of elegance. And to find that returning to her, to return to the ineffable, to return to that doorway at the edge of what an ego can imagine, at the edge of what a human can speak, at the edge of our limits, and to realize that another part of her garden has gone home, has returned from the prism and the prison of human consciousness, of the limits, of the boxes. That is language, that is human thought. It's returned, it's set free. And in setting a part of her garden free, to understand in that ineffable moment, a part of me has returned home. Not me, but a part of me. I am here, and yet as I sit here, I celebrate the part of me that is now free of the prism of my beliefs, of the prism of my concepts, my dogmas, my paradigms, my ideas. And I'm happy it has escaped. And I'm most honored to be a midwife, from a structure of heavy and dark shapes into a landscape that in its beauty, in its grace, its truth, its goodness, transcends the very tools I use to set it free. The very hands I use to take a butterfly from a cage and hold it up into the sunlight cannot cause a butterfly, a swallow by, a willow bee to fly. Cannot. Something more takes it into the transcendent. In the witnessing as it moves out of the event horizon. Look at the box of this camera. It has its little lines, and that which is within the box has significance, has meaning, registers in the observing and measuring device of a little eye at the edge of the camera, registers in the observing and measuring devices of two little eyes through which you look out at me. But what about up here? What about what goes on out of view? Because 99.9999% of all reality is unknown. It is unconscious. It is out of the frame. And so it is fitting that 99.999% of our physical world will not fit into this box at this particular time. We can't even get a country to show up in this little lens here. Well, it is a beautiful opportunity to witness. It is a beautiful opportunity to witness. Energy trapped in ideas and dogmas and cult languages and meanings. Come home. Come home in the poem. Come home in the sound, in the hum. To come home in the sound. But having been honored to let that sound drift a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, watch the biodegradable nature of energy break down, where the structure of a word makes an energy conscious, and then the word is released, And the energy returns to the unconscious, returns until it is remembered, reassembled as a memory of language that reacquaints us with that energy and then releases it again. To bring a narrow bit of the stitching of the universe into the telescopic lens of the human ego. To notice its pattern up and down. And then to let go and let it be the fabric, let it be the dance, let it come back into the wave formation of the feminine movement. Where the stitch is forgotten, where the pattern is not analyzed, where it is enjoyed, where it's looked at through the beautiful delight, the innocence, the fool, the one who sees everything because they see nothing of the prison of the cult in which they were born. The fool who has not yet been initiated into the tired, tried lines of a cult's dogma, and so is present to the full wonder and grace that is our universe, the fool, the doorway to the most sacred and most innocent, inside and out, the transforming door, the beckoner at the edge of the circle, taking us from one structure to another, from one cult. 9,000 cults in human history, 9,000 languages, 9,000 mythologies and stories, and yet one, born of an age, born of a pattern of energy and chaos, and then releasing, going unconscious as yet another age, another myth, another story is told, rising from the bubble as it pops and releases, and rising from the bubble, the cauldron of imagination, of creativity. To live in that domain and to notice how far can one go? How much can one know? The ineffable, this paradox, this play. How much dance? And could we take it into color? And could we take that color into the paintings of a finger, of a body? Could we take it into touch, into taste, into sound, into sex? Could we take it there? And what is that domain? What is that domain? In time, I would write 5,000 poems, a beginning, a friction, a tension, often a dark descent, and then a pivot point. As that which was dark becomes light, as that which was shit becomes the fertilizer taken up by the root and the dirt and the soil that blossoms into the most exquisite orchid flowers, the most beautiful births of a lotus, as the fowl of the geese sinks down into the pool, blooming as the lotus, blooming as the flower on top of the water. Thousands of revolutions as that which our cult discards and disowns as its waste, as the illusion of waste migrates and becomes one and magnificent, migrates and becomes one and magnificent in that which is most idolized and exquisite. As the dark becomes light and the light becomes dark, as the dark becomes light and the light becomes dark. The poet is the one in the middle, spinning the wheel. Ascension and descension, birth, life, death, blossoming. The poet is the one spinning the wheel. And one spoke after another passes through the lens of consciousness, passes through the gripping vice, like teeth of the brake. Can it make it through the eye of judgment unscathed, or does the wheel grind to a halt as the brakes are squeezed, as the fear compresses, as the regression occurs, as the shame descends, as the judgment clamps down, and the entire cycle of life grinds to a halt, so that one spoke of the wheel is denied its free passage through the lens of the critic, through the lens of the dead. And how long does life freeze? How many in our sanitariums are caught holding the vice-like grip of our cult's inability to digest a single spoke on the wheel of life as it turns through the cult's lens, asking those who occupy this taboo space to freeze, to be the indigestible symbol of waste, of loss, of depression. Holding these fixated shapes, unable to breathe, unable to dance. How many droplets of light have become frozen, doing our cult's bidding, reminding us of the faces of the psyche we cannot love, and so we turn away.